Okay, let me ask you something. The building you're in right now, what if I told you it has this huge carbon footprint we've been completely ignoring for decades? It's true. While we've all been focused on things like cars and power plants, we've been missing a massive piece of the climate puzzle, the hidden carbon cost that's literally baked into our buildings. Yeah, we hear a lot about green buildings, right? And we think of energy efficiency, better insulation, smart thermostats, and that's all great stuff, don't get me wrong. But that's only looking at what we call operational carbon. The real story, the much bigger story actually, starts way, way before anyone even flips on a light switch. And the scale of this, honestly, it's hard to wrap your head around. A UN report found that we are building the equivalent of a brand new New York City every single month. Actually, less than that, every 34 days. Just let that sink in for a second. The sheer amount of new construction going on and all the emissions that come with it, it's just staggering. So let's do it. Let's pull back the curtain on this hidden footprint. It's time to talk about the part of the carbon equation that's been missing from the conversation and, crucially, from how companies track their own climate impact. So, how big a deal is this? Well, the built environment, we're talking everything from our houses and offices to giant data centers, is responsible for a whopping 40% of global carbon emissions. 40%! If we're even remotely serious about tackling climate change, this is a sector we just can't afford to ignore anymore. Okay, so where's all this carbon actually coming from? Because it's not just about, keeping the lights on and the AC running. To really get the full picture of a building's carbon footprint, you have to split it into two totally different categories. And this is the key distinction right here. We need to understand the difference between what we call operational emissions and this other thing called embodied emissions. Okay, think of it like this. Operational emissions are like the gas your car burns while you're driving around. For a building, that's the day-to-day energy, the electricity, the gas for heating and cooling, simple enough. But embodied emissions, that's all the pollution that was created just to make the car in the first place. For buildings, we're talking about the insane amount of energy it takes to forge steel, to fire up cement kilns for concrete, to manufacture glass, and then to haul all of that heavy stuff to the construction site. It's this massive carbon bill that's already paid in full before anyone even gets the keys. And that upfront bill is, well, it's huge. If you look at all the new buildings going up between now and 2050, embodied carbon is projected to make up almost half of their total emissions. Half! That is a gigantic blind spot in our climate strategy that we've just been, overlooking. So you gotta ask, right? If this embodied carbon thing is such a huge problem, why haven't we been talking about it? Why has it been ignored for so long? And the answer is actually pretty simple. We just didn't have a good, standardized way to measure it. But that's finally starting to change. You've probably heard the old saying, you can't manage what you can't measure. And that's exactly what's been happening here. Without a consistent way to track embodied carbon, it's been pretty much impossible for companies to get a handle on the problem. It's like this massive, invisible anchor that's been dragging down our climate goals. Okay, so the global gold standard for this stuff is called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It breaks emissions down into 3 scopes. Scope 1 is your direct emissions, like from a furnace in your building. Scope 2 is the emissions from the electricity you buy. But Scope 3 is the big, messy bucket for everything else in your supply chain. And guess what? That's exactly where embodied carbon lives. And that's precisely why it's been so darn hard to measure accurately. This example just nails it. Let's say you're Nancy, right? You're in charge of sustainability at some big tech company. Your company just dropped $5 billion on shiny new data centers and a new headquarters. But when you sit down to do your annual carbon footprint report, the emissions from all that concrete, all that steel, all that glass, they're just not there. It's a massive, multi-billion-dollar hole in your company's climate story. So to fix this problem for Nancy, and really for the whole industry, we needed a new rulebook. One that gives us the tools to finally see and measure these hidden emissions. And the most important tool is something that works kind of like a nutrition label, but for carbon. It's called an Environmental Product Declaration, or an EPD for short. Basically, it's a standardized, verified report that shows you the environmental impact of a product across its entire life. It's a total game changer. For the first time, an architect can look at 2 different steel beams or 2 different kinds of insulation and directly compare their carbon footprints. It's that nutrition label for carbon. But there's a catch. Just like with food labels, you might wonder, can I really trust this? Not all EPDs were being created equally.
They might use different assumptions, different data, different software. So how do you make sure you're actually comparing apples to apples?
This is where the new protocol gets really clever. It introduces something called a pedigree matrix. Think of it as a quality score for the data inside the EPD. It asks questions like, is this data for the exact product from that one factory, or is it just a generic industry average? Does it use real measured data from suppliers, or is it based on estimates? The matrix spits out a score, so we can finally compare products on a totally level playing field. It's brilliant. And look, this isn't just some boring accounting exercise. Creating this standardized, reliable system for measuring embodied carbon, it has the power to completely transform the entire construction industry. Because for the first time, the very first time, architects, builders, and the big companies paying for these buildings can look at their plans and make truly informed choices. They can see, plain as day, that one concrete mix has 30% less embodied carbon than another. They can choose insulation made with renewable energy. They can optimize for climate impact in a way that was just impossible before now. And this kicks off an incredibly powerful chain reaction. Once you have standardized data, you can make those informed choices. And when buyers, the people with the money, start consistently choosing low-carbon materials, that sends a huge economic signal all the way back up the supply chain. All of a sudden, the folks making steel, cement, and glass have a massive financial incentive to innovate, to clean up their act, and to make lower carbon products so they can win those contracts. This is how you start to decarbonize an entire industry from the ground up. This quote just says it all perfectly. A buyer can set a standard for a product's carbon footprint. This is a powerful signal, and one that has the potential to send economic ripples through supply chains. It's about using purchasing power. By simply demanding to see the nutrition label, the people buying the materials can force real, tangible change. So think about where we started. We've gone from a world where almost half of a building's entire carbon footprint was totally invisible to a world where we can finally measure it, compare it, and actually do something about it. This kind of transparency is a genuine game changer. So the big question now is, what are we going to do with this new superpower? Now that we can count the true cost, what will we choose to build?